build up a microforest. And where is it? Some ideas on how you could consider where perhaps in the Jurong neighborhood it might be suitable for planting these microforests. So if I were to talk about what is a microforest, actually the best way is to give you an example. And if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic and this was not COVID, we would have been able to bring you to see the example that I'm going to talk about. Okay, but unfortunately, I guess we have to hold this in a more electronic form. So it's okay. So I've tried to prepare that you not just hear my voice and see the slides, but also you hear some sounds later. Okay, so basically, if you were to Google microforest right now, right, you probably will see this man's name, Miyawaki Akira. Okay, the Japanese professor. And actually, very, very long ago in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, he had this idea of how do I actually bring back forests to places which have been destroyed, and destroyed by what? So specifically, he was working on places where, I don't know if you all know what mining is, okay? So for example, in Peninsular Malaysia in the past, there's a lot of tin mining, okay? So they extract tin from the soil, and the process of extracting the tin, the whole soil gets transformed into a very dirty, contaminated material. Huge holes form in the ground. All the trees disappear. The place becomes very hot. The rivers and the streams all become polluted and very, very dirty. Okay, so recently, I think it's just yesterday or so, Channel News Asia was also talking about aluminium mining in Bintan. So they extract aluminium in Bintan, and this creates a lot of pollution and creates very, very bare areas that are just open and hot, and none of the plants can grow back. So in order to bring back the plants and restore nature and make it cooler and restore the ecosystem, how do you actually bring back these plants and also the animals back to these severely destroyed places, right? And so that's what he studied, and he came up with a method. And this method later on it was called Miyawaki forest. Okay, so he started doing the usual quiet Japanese way of doing your thing very, very well. Okay, but not going around and talking too much about it. So he started lots and lots of projects all over the world. But so eventually, it seems that in the last 10, 20 years, right, the Angmos, they started to come across this method, and they got very excited about it. So sometimes, always think about Angmo maybe got the best ideas, maybe Angmo is better than us. But actually, this is a case where the Westerners, they realized, oh, this Asian professor had this very, very good idea, and they started to use this idea, and that's where this Miyawaki method became popular again. And what they've been actually trying to use it to do is recently they have been trying to put back forests into our cities and towns, places where people work and live, next to your buildings, in your green spaces, next to your roads, and so on. So it becomes bringing back these forests into urban areas. But because in urban areas, there's not much space, okay? So necessarily when you plant back these forests, they're very, very tiny. And because they're tiny, right, people started calling them mini forests, micro forests, and that's where you get this term microforest, okay? And precisely this method that Professor Miyawaki came up with is very, very suitable for very, very small places. How do you actually bring back a very natural forest-like environment back into a very small place? Okay, you don't need such a big place. You actually can do it in a small area, and it's actually very apt that a method that was used to rehabilitate and restore places that are destroyed and scarred by mining is actually used in an urban area. Because when you think about it, our cities and our towns, where we transform everything from trees to concrete, is actually a very, very powerful trauma on the face of the earth. So to actually use this method to try and see how we can coexist and live side by side with nature, to use this method is actually very apt. So I actually didn't know anything about Miyawaki forest until recently. Okay, but when I was still a student about 10, 11 years ago, there were some of my colleagues that were actually doing some things that just in these couple of years when I heard about this Miyawaki method, then I realized that, hey, these friends, colleagues, Singaporeans, fellow Singaporeans like you and me, experts in their field, botanists, actually came up with the same method, and they actually created what would have been called a Miyawaki forest by Angmos or by other people right here in Singapore. And I'm going to show you this example. Okay, so let's take a trip down to this place called Hot Park. I don't know whether everybody knows where Hot Park is. I just went to search like, how do you get to Hot Park from Jurong? You probably can take the, if you go to Commonwealth MRT, you take 100, okay, bus number 100 probably goes there. You go to Clementi, you change the bus, 963 probably goes there, or you can take Circle Line until Labrador Park Station, okay, Circle Line, CC27. Then you can walk up, it's a bit of a walk up, but you know, if you want to have some exercise, you can walk all the way up to Hot Park. So Hot Park is actually in between Kent Ridge Park and Telok Blangah Hill Park. It's actually along these, what NParks has called the southern regions of Singapore. Okay, so it's a place where people get to showcase gardening. People go there and buy plants, get to see how people have some new ideas on how to plant up their surrounding area. So if you're a greenie, if you're someone who really loves to do landscaping, then you probably would have heard of Hot Park and know where it is. Okay, but Hot Park has a secret, all right? And this secret, not many people know about it. Okay, so at Hot Park, there is this place called Native Garden. Okay, actually you can buy this book. I don't take any commission from NParks, but NParks Botanic Gardens actually sells this book, Native Garden at Hot Park. Okay, it tells you about I don't know how many species are there. There might be some NParks colleagues hidden in the audience here who will know. But I don't know, 70 or 80 plant species that's actually showcased in this book. Okay, so in this tiny plot of land, which is probably about 35 meters by 15 meters, okay, they've planted many Singaporean species, meaning that these species are only found in Singapore. Are not only found in Singapore, sorry, they are found in Singapore, originally found in Singapore before we humans came. All right, so that's what we call a native species, a Singaporean species, like, Bentu, Bumi Putra. Okay, so yeah, in this plot of land within the center of Hot Park, right? Just in about 10, 11 years ago, there was a project by my former boss and our colleagues actually planted many species. About I just checked, it's about 127 Singaporean species in just a 35 by 15 meter plot of land. That's a lot, and it's not just one individual of each species, one plant of each species, but very high density. Maybe some of them, maybe they could find 10, 20, 40 plants of that species. They actually squeezed it into that plot. Okay, so what did it look like when they first planted it? So how do you actually look for this native garden? If you, from Hot Park, from Alexandra Road, if you walk all the way down, you try to look for this pavilion. Okay, so this pavilion is the landmark where you can find it. And in front of the pavilion, there's a small pond, and then there's actually fish. And again, our ingenious colleagues actually put forest fish that can be found in the forest streams of Singapore into this place. Okay, it looks a bit cloudy, but I think the water is probably better now. But this is in the beginning when they just started up. Okay, today you might not be able to find the hut so easily because it has been almost completely surrounded by the trees that have grown up around it. Okay, so around this plot of land, once you find this hut, you backtrack a bit. Okay, so if you imagine about 10, 11 years ago, this is what it looked like. So they squeeze in many plants. All right, nobody plants plants like this at such high density lah. It's like Dian Lui, no need money one. Just keep planting and planting, putting many individuals inside here. Let me just show you more species. Okay, there's a pathway. There is actually two pathways. There's a bit of a gravel road and a gravel path, a bit of a stone path. Okay, and they even cut a stream through. Okay, and let water trickle down right through these plants. And beside the stream, they actually planted things that are actually found naturally besides forest streams in our nature reserves. Okay, so this is a collaboration of NParks. That's why they managed to get so much material, which is not so easy to get so many species of from our nature reserves. Okay, so because NParks also wanted to know, of all these species that we can actually find in Singapore, 2,000 species, plant species that can be found in Singapore, can we actually use them in landscaping? Okay, so this is what it looked like initially when we just planted up. All the plants quite small, but plant many of them, many species, all in this small part of land. Okay, and this is what it looks like 10 years later. Everything grows up, and this is actually the stream and the gravel path that I was talking about. It looks very seasoned. It looks like a forest that is not just 10 years old. It looks like a forest that's at least decades of years old. Okay, and just to add on to the sound effect, I don't know whether you all can hear this sound. So this is what it sounds like. Small little patch of land with the stream going through. Of course, later I'll say that we didn't necessarily have to go extreme, but it's very cooling. There's a joke that hot part is a very hot part, very, very hot there. But this is really like what the title of the talk says, the Oasis of Nature Gardens, the Reservoir of Hot Part. Okay, and there's also lots of plant and animals that have come back to this a free book online to download to find out what are these birds, the dragonflies, frogs, and so on that have come back to this small little patch. Okay, so now you know what a example of a microforest is. This tiny little patch that is more or less a forest that we can recreate in our urban environments. And you see, however, so much investment that we put into it. You might ask yourself, okay, that's like a cool idea, but why? Why should we have microforests in our urban environment? So, like I said, probably many people here probably go to our nature reserves or nature parks and have hiked around our forests in Singapore. I'm not sure whether people can recognize this top-down view from the aircraft or from helicopter. This is actually our Central Catchment Nature Reserve. On the left is actually MacRitchie Reservoir. Then the center, I think, is Upper and Lower Pierce Reservoir that drains into Bishan Park. You see Bishan Park running down there, Bishan Ang Mo Kio Town Park. And then on the right side is actually Seletar, I think it's Upper Seletar Reservoir. And around these reservoirs in the central part of Singapore are very, very good quality forests. They're still, compared to forests perhaps in the rest of the region where they've not been logged or not been cut down before. Maybe these forests, it's not quite the same, but then these are our best forests in Singapore. And people really love this forest, and nature lovers really love this forest. This is where a lot of the animals and plants are still surviving in Singapore, right? MacRitchie Reservoir, you know how many people love MacRitchie Reservoir. Even the army loves MacRitchie Reservoir. We go there for a healthy lifestyle and all that, jogging around the reservoir. Okay, but people have to go all the way to MacRitchie or Pierce or Seletar, unless you live in Bishan, or you live in Thomson area. You see Thomson Road running through. But like I said, I used to grow up in the east. I seldom go to the nature reserves when I was a kid. So I don't have the kind of chance, if you're like me living in another place, they don't always have the opportunity to go to such good quality forests, okay? And actually, Singaporeans nowadays, they really, really are getting to love nature more and more. I'm sure people have been hearing about this place, Clementi Forest, along Clementi Road. There's actually a patch of forest opposite. I think it's SIM or SUSS. And this patch of forest, somebody flew a drone inside there. I don't know whether it's legal or not, but flew a drone inside there, and then took this nice footage or video of a misty forest, like from Lord of the Rings, like that. And then it went viral, and more and more people started going there nowadays. And so someone with very good design skills said, maybe we should put a boardwalk through this place and all that. So you see that people are really, really yearn for the opportunity to have some new green spaces, especially given COVID now, you have to keep yourself healthy and also socially distanced. You need to go outdoors more. All right, so Singaporeans really want more and more outdoor spaces. But not everybody has this opportunity. Not everybody lives in Clementi. Not everybody is rich enough to live in Thomson Road. Okay, but some people actually have a lot of forests nearby. I'm very jealous. Like people just up north from Jurong, your neighbors in Bukit Batok, they have so much forest in their estates. They have Bukit Batok Nature Park, right? they have Bukit Batok Town Park around Xiao Guilin area, okay? And Mr. Desmond Lee just announced that they're going to reinstate Bukit Batok Hillside Park. How come they get all the forests in their housing estates and all the Bukit Batok residents can go and jalan-jalan around all these parks and see all the forests, but the rest of us don't really have such opportunity for us. I think people bring back this opportunity to go out to greenery, which research has shown that actually improves your mental health, not just your physical health, takes off the load of the day, improves stress, reduce incidence of depression. There's a lot of problems with mental illnesses nowadays. If you were able to go out into the greenery, have a bit of exercise, and also take your mind off the your work and all that, it's all good for health. And also, people have also talked about another Japanese idea, Shinriki or something like that. It's like a forest bathing. You go into the forest, and then there's actually organic compounds that are released by the trees. That people say that make you feel better and happier. And actually, these organic compounds is scientifically shown that it actually creates more rain. So if you go listen to geography, your geography teacher in the past, they tell you that rain is caused by the land heating up faster than the sea, and therefore the wind blows in from the sea, bringing in rain from the ocean into the land. Recent research has kind of overturned this. It's actually the forest producing all these chemicals that are actually causing rainwater to condense faster. And this rainwater that condense faster brings in more rain. And that's what we call a water pump. And forests are very, very important for regulating the water cycle. Forests are also important for regulating too much water. So New Year's Day, we just had a serious downpour over 2 days, right? And this, is frequently going to happen in the future with climate change. You're going to get more and more such extreme weather. And forests are a bulwark, for us to buffer against these kinds of extreme weather events, because the forest soil can actually absorb the water. The plants intercept the water and make sure that the water doesn't, so quickly discharge into the canals and the canal overflow. And of course, the forest also keep in the carbon dioxide from the air that then reduces the rate at which our climate and our weather is changing and warming. Many benefits to forest. Forests keep surroundings actually cooler, because when they actually suck up the water and allow the water to go back into the atmosphere, there is actually a cooling effect. And that's why Bukit Batok residents they probably find that where got climate change, they feel that their neighborhood is quite cool. That's because they got a lot of forests, but the rest of us might not have so much. Okay, so there are many benefits to bringing back forests. I saw this picture again recently on Facebook, and the title of this picture, when people were sharing it, was "Nature Losing the Battle." Okay, which is insane. I don't know which part of the world this is, where is really the buildings are so tightly packed. I don't even know whether this photograph is doctored or what, but it to me, it's visually, it really sends you a message. But I would like to think of it in another way, right? Think of this as growing a forest in the middle of our city like that, in the middle of Jurong, in the middle of where I used to live in Bedok and Chai Chee, or where my mom now lives in Tampines. Can we then seed these forests and grow all these microforests within our urban estates, within our housing estates, just like this, so that nature can actually reclaim a little bit of this space, and we can also get to enjoy this space that nature has reclaimed. How can we help nature get back this space? Okay, so that's the idea of what we're talking about in microforests, all the benefits of forests. But forests are also homes for many animals. So I really wanted to do this for a very long time. So I actually have a research project ongoing in collaboration with HDB. And what my research assistants do is that they actually survey different parts of Singapore, 6 towns in Singapore. And Jurong West is one of the towns. And we just happen to have three spots in Taman Jurong that we survey. And I asked my staff to pull out photographs of all the birds, butterflies, dragonflies, and frogs that they have found in your area in Taman Jurong. And these are just a sample of the wonderful animals that actually are already in your estate, right? And you really might not know. You see the picture on the top row, third from the right, two woodpeckers. Do you know that you have woodpeckers in your estate? Okay, right. You know, probably the rain tree outside your house, if there's a hole in the rain tree, don't complain to NParks and ask them to cut down that branch. But that hole might actually have a pair of these Sunda pygmy woodpeckers inside. Okay, or you know, you might have a bird that's actually singing its heart out. That might be oriental magpie robin. Okay, and you have birds that come during the migratory season. They will come down from Siberia, from China, down the South China Sea in October, and then they might stay here for December, and then they might go back, you know, or they might actually pass through and go down to New Zealand and Australia, and then in February or March they will pass by again. So these animals are there. Right, you can see there's this oriental honey buzzard. It's actually an eagle. It's commonly found in our housing estates. If you keep an eye out during the migratory season, you might actually see some of this. Even the animals, right? After it rains, you got this wah wah wah. This bullfrog. That's the banded bullfrog at the bottom. The Asian toad that's probably lurking around in the park connector or beside the drain nearby. Okay, and lots of dragonflies, which I don't know much about dragonflies. They've put the photographs of dragonflies that they found in this area. So all these are already in Taman Jurong. If there were forest habitats, you would get more of this and other species also coming back to Taman Jurong. And this is really a good opportunity for our children to be able to learn biology just next to their school, within their school compounds itself. They can see all these species, they can learn about nature, they can learn about biology in a classroom next door. Okay, so these are the benefits of microforests. So before we start going into, okay, sounds good. Then how do I do it, right? So I need to tell you a little bit of biology. So what I do in the universities, I teach and I do research. Okay, so I teach biology, I also research on biology, and I'm going to give you some very, very basics of how plants grow and they interact with nature. Okay, facts, right? Plants need sunlight. They also need rain. Okay, so the amount of sunlight and rain then determines how hot the environment is and how humid, how heat this environment is, all right, which then affects how they grow. But it's not just the sunlight and the rain, okay, that affect how a plant grow, but also the soil. The soil is very, very important, right? The soil, if it is on a steep slope, it will drain very fast. If the soil is very sandy, it will drain very fast. If the soil has a lot of clay, there'll be a lot of water logging, and then a lot of water will be around the roots of the plant, and the plant have to tahan this kind of condition, right? And in the soil, there are also a lot of microorganisms. There are worms, there are ants, there are mushrooms, okay, in the soil, and there are bacteria, good bacteria as well as bad bacteria in the soil. And all these actually form what we call an ecosystem that is actually beneficial, right? And the plants really grow depending on how good this underground ecosystem is. The earthworms, the other kinds of worms, the other kinds of insects, all these can be good actually. Most of the time, they're actually good for the plant, right? So a plant, when you plant it, the seedling eventually, depending on its species, the type of species, it will grow into a certain shape, a certain form, it will grow at a certain speed. That is nature. So we have to understand how a plant will grow in its environment, and we have to adapt, and we have to learn how to make friends with the plant, right? And then eventually it will grow into a larger plant or tree, and then it will start to give back into the environment. The leaves will fall down into the soil, and then the soil will change as the plant grows. And that's how, an ecosystem is always changing. Then that's where you get all the butterflies coming back, the birds coming back, so on. So this is what essentially I teach students over 13 weeks, the next 13 weeks. Next week is starting, school is starting next week, everyone. Next 13 weeks, that's essentially what we'll be teaching them. But that's what you need to know also in order to understand what are the implications of trying to bring back forests into our urban environment. Okay, so the idea of this Miyawaki method, which is not necessarily Miyawaki method, it's a hot park native garden method, or basically what we're trying to do is to bring back a high diversity, very complex, very 复杂, very heterogeneous, all over the place environment that we're trying to change the way that we really think about greenery, okay, and bring back many, many species plant them in high density, and if possible, we want to bring back species that are Singaporean species and use them in our urban environment, right? So that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that there are many layers. You plant trees that will, you plant seedlings or saplings that will eventually become tall trees. But you also don't forget to plant some seedlings or saplings that will not be so tall. So there are many layers. And then in the understory, you plant some things which might never become trees, and they're happy to stay in the shade when their friends grow up and cast a shade over them, then they'll be very happy. So plant all these different kinds of environments, all right? And Apex is really trying to do some of this. If you go around your roadsides or in your parks or something, you see, wow, Apex is really working at it, putting in so many things in along roads, up and down, many different colors. Yes, this is the idea of a multi-layered planting scheme that they're trying to put in. The idea is the same, all right? And what do you actually plant? So, like what I said, if you can, you choose Singaporean species. If you can, even better if you can get it from Singaporean stock. But that's not always possible. So because Singaporean stock means that these come from the nature reserves, but our nature reserves, we have to control, and manage our nature reserves. So we cannot just anyhow take from the nature reserves. But in the nursery, sometimes they will sell your Malaysian stock, but Singaporean species. Okay, so the same species that you can find in Singapore, but maybe they came in from Malaysia. Some of the examples are down here. If you go to MPark's Flora and Fauna web, it's a great resource. You can look for what I call native species, and you can which one has nice red flowers, which one has blue flowers, which one has blue fruits even, which ones are good for attracting butterflies. Some of these are really good at attracting butterflies or even birds. Okay, and you just you go for as many species as possible. That's the idea, that's the concept. There's of course a caveat later that I will tell you about, right? And you have to pay attention to eventually when everything grows up tall, like what happened at Hot Park when all these trees grow up very tall. Initially, they were all my height, maybe shorter, and now they're all towering trees. So are there things that can actually survive in the understory? And then those that grow up tall usually are the ones that can take the light, and then they will grow very fast. Okay, you don't want things to be too fast growing because you have a problem. All right, you maybe I want to reach my microforest in 2 years. Okay, then you plant this tree that grows very fast. But things that grow fast usually don't last long. So the wood will be very weak and they will die early, they'll die young, they might cause a hazard. So must be patient. Okay, so don't plant things that grow too fast. All right, then okay, maybe we choose all this already. Then where should we plant this microforest? What are the possible places that we could think about how we could create some of these microforests? It really depends on to what extent. I think later there's a poll. So at any point in time, just stop me so that if you want to have this poll. But to what extent of microforest do you really want? Do you really want all the works, full breakfast, big breakfast, everything inside? Or do you want to pick and choose some elements because you're not comfortable yet going all the way? Okay, so that you'll determine how much it would cost, all right? How many plants you need to use. And so everything we need to decide on what our objectives, how we're going to go first, right? Then once you decide that, then you can think about what area you want to plant. So like I said, the native garden at Hot Park is such a small area, right? 30 by 20 meters, I think it's probably possible to find a few places in your neighborhood, all right? I live in Punggol now, so in the front of my housing estate, I always fantasize about what if HDB had consulted some of us before they planted up the area? Maybe we could have created a nice forest that maybe looks exactly like something that I saw in NTU before. Beautiful, our forest trees, right in front of my housing estate. I would really love it to be there, right? And it's not a very large area that I'm talking about. Really, it can be found in your precinct areas. Okay. Often you might want to look for places which currently are not being used, right? And you can probably find gentle slopes, in your estate where this kind of slope, you don't know what to do with it. It's full of grass. People cannot play soccer on it. Not big enough to do anything. Okay, I'll plant 1 or 2 trees there. if you want to be a bit daring, take a look at some of these slopes and imagine a forest down there. And what if I plant it up like a forest? So I invite anyone to come to NUS, my Department of Biological Sciences. There is one slope over there beside one of our blocks where the colleagues, after they did up hot park, right? Because there are lots of plants nowhere to put, right? NUS and NPark say, okay, why don't you try a new site and try it within NUS? And they went crazy, they went berserk. Okay. Also happens that Mr. Mentor Lee Kuan Yew also passed through NUS one day and said, this place is not green enough. Wow. Then NUS said, okay, let's be more green. So they supported it, and then our colleagues got the go sign to plant up some of these slopes, and some of these slopes really look fantastic right now. People go past and say, wow, you have such things here. And some of these colleagues are now in NParks, and they still come back to NES to harvest some of these plants so that they have material to grow. Okay, so it's not all the way like a microforest. It's what I could call in between, somewhere in between, right? So if you imagine some slopes that you think maybe you could spare to plant out a microforest, that's okay. You could also imagine some of the precinct parks that you have. I know there's Taman Jurong Green. Of course, you probably don't want to convert the entire Taman Jurong Green into forest. Not everybody will like it. But if maybe you want to try in one corner, maybe you want to try something, okay, that'll be good. So one thing I would advise, if you can, land is scarce in Singapore. So maybe you don't have a choice. But if you can, try not to plant where there are a lot of roads, in the middle of roads, okay? And I mean, this is what we call marginal land. So this land, like what I said, it's like slopes. Nobody knows what to do with it. You want to plant it up? Okay, sure. People say, I don't have any use for it. You can go ahead and do it. But on the other hand, beside roads, right, you have to be careful that you might be spending a lot of effort and money planting in the middle of such all these flyovers and all that. And the animals won't go there. The plants probably can grow, it'd be quite nice. Nobody also wants to get through such noisy environment to go there. The cicadas won't bother to go there and sing because it's just too noisy. They get drowned out by the traffic. So if you can, don't go for places that's too busy, full of roads. You try some peaceful neighborhood, within your estates. Maybe look for. I know there's the canal up in the north at Taman Jurong that comes. It's probably, I don't know whether there's a park connected there. These more quiet places, with water, maybe that'll be good to try and consider. Okay, so I don't know. You have a poll. Do you want to ask the poll now, or take a break? Ask any questions or anything?
Very enlightening presentation, Eugene. I suggest you continue and finish it. I think the next slide was intriguing. There's a dollar sign there.
Sorry, I bao myself. Okay, so like I said, how far do you want to go in the microforest, right? You go all the works, big breakfast on the left, okay, all the way Hot Park, somewhere in the middle, okay, lots of trees but maybe not necessarily so much like why we went crazy like Bien Lui, in Native Garden at Hot Park, maybe don't even need native species, but maybe okay, let's have more trees. Or if you want to go for normal greenery on the right, that's also okay. So the caveat is everything needs money. Everything needs resources. Now, we often say IP, but the problem is you want nice, you want good and cheap. But the reality is, of course, that like what I said, we put in so many species in Native Garden and Hot Park, so many individuals, right? Eventually, some of them would die. A lot of them would die. And actually, this is part and parcel of this thing called the Miyawaki method. It's expected. It's about survival of the fittest, and it's really the species that can adapt to the environment, the strongest ones, right? It sounds very cruel, but then this nature is actually like that. So it will actually be the ones that can survive. And it's not as though all those other things that died, they actually went to waste. No, nature again has cycling. Okay, so when they die, they go into the soil, they rot, and then the nutrients go into the soil, and then they feed those which can survive. And that's how the soil gets transformed. Ideally, what we want to do is, before we plant, we also want to transform the soil. We want to loosen it up. We might want to put in some organic matter. Okay, if you don't have that much money, then maybe you might not be able to do that. But things that die, the plants that die, even though you put a lot of plants inside there, they actually go back into the soil and they help the ones that survive. Okay, and that's why it's actually not wasted, right? But it's just a different way of looking at it. That's why these plants can actually grow so tall and become a forest like that in such a short period of time, because everybody is helping, right? Those people who don't make it help those who actually can make it. Okay, so if you of course don't have that much resources, or maybe like later I'll tell you, IPIT, there's also other stuff to consider, right? And you might not want to go all the way. Then I guess we could consider something in between. So I guess we have to decide as a community, what do we want? How far do we want to go? How far do we want to push it? How far do we want to sell it to our residents? And how confident are we that our residents can take it and we go to their comfort level, and also what we think is good compromise. Okay, so let me point out some of the problems. I'm a scientist. Some people hate talking to scientists because scientists like to say, but then, okay, I tell you, wow, Backward Forest is so good, we have more forests, it's doable. But then one thing is that initially, maybe there'll be some maintenance because it's so dense, the greenery. A lot of your contractors they look at your planting plan. They're not used to it. No, they won't be used to this kind of planting plan, and they say, you want to plant like that? You know how much it will cost now? Wow, problem many have, they'll tell you. Okay, but don't worry. After the forest becomes self-sustaining, right, the amount of maintenance will go down. But then, in terms of initial few years, you might have to, put in a bit of effort to maintain it. But never mind, this is maybe one way to get the residents engaged, to be involved in this pruning and cutting, get the residents down. I know let's not always depend on, hiring contractors to do this kind of thing. Maybe the residents can take part in this as well. Okay, aside from plants growing too fast, there might be unwanted plants that come in. I don't know if people recognize this gentleman here. This is our former High Commissioner to Brunei, Mr. Joseph Koh, who is a spider expert. Not many people know he's actually a spider expert. So he's no longer a High Commissioner to Brunei. But he's now very active in Bukit Timah. If you go to this Facebook page called Friends of Bukit Timah, he's on a war against this Batman plant, which is threatening to consume Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. So this is a very aggressive weed that will grow, and it's possible that in such small patches of forest, they're actually very vulnerable to weed coming in. So weeding might be an issue. These are unwanted plants, and you might have to actually pull out some of these weeds now and then. But again, this is where you can engage the community. That's what NParks does. NParks actually engages the nature community, school children, as part of community efforts to get them to come to our nature reserves to pull out the plants that are not wanted. And it's a really good bonding activity, good activity for children to get away from their phones and tablets, get sweaty and get a bit of exercise. Okay, so these, I guess, problems, but you could also think of how you could transform them to become opportunities for more social engagement, right? And there are other things I need to tell you. Okay, so everybody has a different comfort. Not everybody is a nature lover. Not everybody loves forests. Okay, and with forests then comes other animals which people might not be used to. Okay, so these are all pictures of they are taken from recent news articles about people complaining about weird black beetles in Bukit Batok. I think this thing that they think is a centipede. It even appears in a lot of the new estates. When they do a lot of mulching in the ground, where there's a lot of dead wood, these things appear. Don't worry, these are not centipedes. They're not wukong. They won't bite you. They won't sting you. Okay, these are actually millipedes. They're quite harmless. You just ignore them. When all the wood rots away, they will go away. So okay, and then you want butterflies, but you don't want caterpillars. Then where you get the butterfly from? So when you see caterpillars on your plants, they say, I got caterpillar, spray. But maybe you planted those plants so that they could attract the butterflies, and the butterflies actually came and laid eggs, and that's how you got the caterpillars. So the public has to be educated to some of these natural parts of the process. And eventually, if you're very successful, this is what my old boss used to say. If you're very successful, you have to prepare for success. Your forest can be so successful that monkeys and wild boars may start getting attracted into your neighborhood. And again, we have to recognize that this is a potential problem, and how do we actually coexist with wildlife, right? Your wild boars roaming around Taman Jurong, or monkeys going around Taman Jurong. Okay, you educate residents how to interact and coexist with wildlife, and how to respect their space, how not to get too friendly with them and try to feed them. Is against the law now. Okay, so these are all the things lah. So a new form of greenery, right? From the old way that we're talking about, usual grass lah, then you plant a few trees here and there. We're trying to have a new way of greenery where we bring back maybe bring back a forest into our heartlands, our housing estates. But a new way of greenery comes with a new mindset, a new way of doing things, a new community, however, right, and a new society. So it's not just about plants, it's not just about money, but it's also about our people around us. Perhaps what is their comfort level, and if they want to try, then how can we help them to adapt to maybe these new ways of doing things? So that's what I feel like. So I just want to end off with this quote that I really like very much when I was working with these colleagues that I talk about that actually created a native garden. They were the ones who introduced me to this quote. So a lot of these things that we talk about, waiting for trees to grow, waiting for society maybe to change and to come across new ways of doing things, adapt to new ways of doing things, putting effort to engage society, to interact with nature and coexist with nature. All this takes time, takes effort, takes resources, takes energy. And sometimes we wonder whether it's actually worth the effort investing in all this. So this quote to me is really, it speaks to me of how I would want Singapore society to be like. I want Singapore to be a society which continues to think far ahead, advance, and think about not just like now, but how do we actually do things that maybe I might not be able to reap the benefits today. But how can I plant the seeds of a microforest in our heartlands that initially doesn't look very much, but I can tell you 10, 20 years later, just as the seeds that my colleagues left behind in NUS and in Hort Park, 10, 20 years later, when I look at this, I'm like, oh my goodness, these were things that did they imagine that they would have left behind when they did this, right? Will we be able to actually plant these seeds in our heartlands and let the microforest grow, and so that Chinese they say 前人种树后人乘凉. The people in front plant the trees, and then the people that come after that are the ones that actually enjoy the shade. So yeah, this is all I have to say. I'm happy to take any questions after this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Chong. Wow, this is a fantastic presentation, and I think what you shared when we were preparing for this, you probably covered it way more with so much more illumination than our discussions about how to put the deck together. Perhaps before we go into the Q&A proper, to open up to the floor, and I also know that many of you have I think there was already one question in the chat, so I'll call that question out shortly, but I wanted to get your perspective. So a lot of the examples you talked about, microforests in Singapore, forests in general, we see Hort Park, we see NUS, they are not near housing estates. So here we are talking about, HDB estate or housing estates, right? And there is also a push by the government to have community gardening or allotment gardens. So obviously, a microforest is different from a community garden and an allotment garden. From your perspective, what would be the biggest and strongest arguments in support of having microforests? Because community gardens and allotment gardens is something that will benefit the community as well, right? So what's your view on why microforest in a HDB estate, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I guess when we think about why is it that NParks has community in bloom or these community gardens where they engage residents to do more gardening, I think people enjoy gardening. It's good for our old folks, you know, they get to interact with nature, get some outdoors exercise and all that. People also enjoy the green spaces, you know, a place to take a walk with your spouse in the evening after a meal with your children, places to play soccer and all that. So these are all the different ways in which we actually make use of green spaces, right? And I I I have heard friends who say this, and I also strongly agree, is that we actually can have more diverse kinds of green spaces, different kinds of green spaces, right? Different people have different ways of enjoying greenery. And I think the fact that there are people who really love our forests in the central catchment, love Clementi Forest, love Bukit Batok Nature Park to bits, is because these people actually have a different way of different kind of greenery that they enjoy. And but right now, we always think of forests as, wow, you need a substantial patch, right? You need to leave a substantial patch down there, and you need to go there, which is not wrong. Of course you need these patches of forest, but then not everybody has the opportunity. And if you can enjoy forest every day, just like you can enjoy your park, your green space downstairs every day, you can play your soccer every day, you can go and tend to your allotment gardens every day. But then there might be some people who really wish that, you know, I could also have a spot of forest that I can go to every weekend. So I think a diversity of green spaces is actually one reason that I think would be good to have a different kind of green space in our environment. I think forests are very, very different from, I'm a forest ecologist, so I might be biased. Obviously, I love forests a lot more than, you know, I love some forests, some types of forests. Very honest, I love some types of forests more. But forest is really very different. When I let you listen to the cicada sounds and the water flowing sounds, this is not the same as other kinds of greenery or the, you know, of course, you know, the sweat that you put into planting brinjals or whatever, but it's different. And some so it really depends whether there is enough wish in the community to have this.
Understand. So we did a pre webinar poll. I would like to show that results. David, if you could help and get your perspective on this. So we asked two questions. I hope everyone is able to see the results. The first question is, the trees and greenery in a green space should be neat and orderly. And if you look at the results, interesting, it's about 53% agree or strongly agree. A quarter neither agree nor disagree, and then the remainder disagree. So clearly there's a perception on the ground that everything should be neat and orderly. But of course, a forest is never neat and orderly. The other one is, the other question we asked is, long grass and unmaintained greenery will have snakes and allow mosquitoes to breed. So here you can see almost 70%, 68% strongly agree or agree. So I'm just wondering, with this is just from our small little, audience here who gave us this feedback. Do you see this as a hindrance, perhaps a barrier that we need to overcome when we think of microforests in housing estates?
Yeah, actually, I was super curious to know what the results would be like, you know, when we were planning this question, right? And in a way, I'm not surprised that before the talk, right, these were the responses. I think this is what we are used to. Like I said, a new kind of green space, a new kind of greenery requires a new kind of mindset, and which might be different from the way that we usually used to think. And but I would like to I mean, I'm an academic, sorry, so maybe I'd like to put a different spin on this. So I had a student in the past that carried out a project, okay? So what she did was that she brought students secondary school JC students to green spaces in Singapore, different green spaces. And before she brought them to the green space, right, she told them, she asked them, how concerned are you if this green space is going to be converted or developed? Okay, then they answer. Then after they go to the green space, she asked them again, so how concerned are you now that the green space will be developed? Once people have familiarity with an idea, they can change their mindset. And a lot of the students, after visiting the place or even hearing about the name of the place, I'm going to visit that place, their response will be more concerned that that place will be developed. It's about, you can never love what you don't know. And I will be curious to know, we don't have to do this. I'll be curious to know if now we ask everybody to poll again, will we see a shift after the talk? Now that I've told you about forests and how forests are chaotic and disorderly, but how lovely that chaos and disorderliness can be.
That's a very good challenge, So maybe we change our. I originally had an approach that I wanted to do this, but let's take the challenge up. Yeah. David, can I get the team to relaunch this? So for everyone in the audience, now that you have heard Dr. Chong do a presentation, we're going to relaunch the same questions to see whether your perspectives have changed. And then I have my own opinions on this. But let's try this out. David, can you relaunch the poll?
Now I'm very nervous. Okay, everybody should be honest. If you David, disagree,
yeah. So honestly, after this, now look at it again and give your results. So the poll has started.
Okay, don't pick everybody.
Yeah. So the host will not be polled. Those who are hosts, they will not be polled. Those who are audience, you will be polled. So I have the benefit of seeing the results before everyone, but I'm not going to share. So David, when everyone has done the poll, just please let us know, and then we can show the results.
Okay, sure.
Okay, we have 70% poll. So if you haven't polled, can you just do the poll? We are at 79% who have voted.
Hey, you don't bet it lah.
Huh? This is like election, and US just had the Georgia.
Oh gosh, what
thing, right?
What a
okay,
show.
We have 81%, so there's still about 9 people who have not gone in to give your poll results. Okay, I'm just going to give about another 10 seconds before we stop. We have 8 more people, so if you haven't submitted your thoughts, please do so now. Okay, we can stop now. So David, can you end the poll and show the results? So can everyone see the results? Wonderful. Wow, interesting. So if we look at the first question, originally we had 53% strongly agree and disagree. Now it has changed to a far lower amount. A lot more people are neither agreeing nor disagreeing. But more of them disagree that it need not necessarily be neat or orderly. And if we look at the second question, long grass, will they have snakes and allow mosquito breeding? I think that one probably the number has increased a bit. Okay, but the interesting thing is my reading, and I could be wrong. This is just a poll. The reading could be they recognize that this should be part and parcel of this whole idea of a forest and should be okay. That's my reading. But never mind. We can Dr. Chong, you have challenged us, and I think you have won that challenge. Gladly, I'll gladly accept the results, because I think it brought to memory another webinar we had called the Dragons of Inaction. It's about bias. So I think this whole issue of people's bias, right, and how it affects their choices, we need to tackle it. And you brought up a very interesting example. We tested it in our webinar, and I feel this is something we can take forward as a community. And I want to thank all the audience for being so game to, come in and do this test with us. I would like to now also welcome everyone to ask questions. We have about 25 more minutes, and I really want this to be interactive with our audience, So please don't hesitate to ask questions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll start the ball rolling because there is one question that has been raised in our chat group. Several questions actually. I'll start there. But if you want to ask questions, if you click participants, the side panel will show up. And in the side panel, there is a raise hand. You can raise hand and then I'll call your name and you can ask your questions. Alternatively, you can post your questions in the chat group and I will ask the questions from the chat group, okay? We'll try our best to answer all the questions in the chat group. We may not be able to answer all, but we'll do our best. It would be better if you raise your hands and ask directly. I think we want to make it very interactive. Okay, so this is basically just some Q&A house rules. Raise questions. If you want to raise questions, raise your hands first, and then you can post your questions in the chat group. So let's start with the first one by Chong Heng. Okay, Chong Heng, you asked the first question, which was, may I check if there is an optimal ratio between vegetation and urban spaces to achieve a more sustainable environment? So I think this is a larger question, a broader question. Dr. Chong, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, this question is supposed to be my postdoctoral topic when I was at the University of Queensland.
Perfect. So you have the perfect answer.
The problem is that I don't have the answer yet. so I don't want to go too much into the technical details, but let me see how I can put it in layman terms. I think so a lot of these are about decision making. How do you make a good decision? So the first step in making a good decision is to know what we want to achieve. So what do we want to get from green spaces? What do we appreciate from green spaces? And what is our goal, right? That we can either think about how do we you get a certain you're able to measure a certain amount of benefit, and then after that you think about how do you minimize the amount of green space that you need in order to achieve this target. Or you talk about, I have a certain budget of area that I can set aside for green space. How do I maximize where I put these green spaces so that I can get the maximum amount of benefit? That's very technical. I mean, that is the decision framework in which that I tried to approach this in the past. I don't have an answer. To me, I guess the first thing we need to decide as a society is we need to know what we want. If we don't know what we want, there's no such thing as an optimal ratio. If society doesn't, if you don't know what you want, you cannot make a good decision. And at the end of the day, the optimal ratio is talking about making a good decision. So, sorry, it's a non-answer. It's basically, I think the first thing we need to know before we know what is the optimal ratio is what do we want as a society from green spaces.
I think that's a very valid point, because until society can decide, right, there will be trade-offs of land use. And I was actually reading one research. We did some research and we found that despite the Singapore government's efforts to increase the green plot ratio, the proportion of green spaces to the number of people, and that ratio, so we have given up more space for green, but unfortunately the population numbers have also gone up. So the ratio actually went down. But that may not necessarily be the case, because we have actually opened up more spaces for green. So you are right, there's all these questions society needs to answer first before optimality can be decided.
Yes.
The other question from that we have, that I'm just looking, is from Mr. Baska. How different is a microforest from the horizontal or vertical greenery systems integrated into our building?
Another very interesting question. So currently, the kind of rooftop greenery or vertical greenery that we see, just like your ground level greenery, there is the typical kind. There's typical greenery on the ground level is grass, a few trees, maybe some shrubs. Rooftop greenery and vertical greenery, also there's the typical kind. You don't go and look at, I don't know, there's one hotel or something, was it Park Royal or Pickering Street or something, which the whole building looks like one whole forest. Okay, don't look at those. But then there is also the typical kind, right? Your top of your multi-story car park, there's this very flat greenery, creepers that people plant on the ground and they grow up the wall. Okay, my wife, she's probably gonna kill me for mentioning this, but she used to do some of this rooftop greenery and vertical greenery, and she's told me the problems and also behind all this. So those are what we call the typical greenery, okay? And that's definitely not a forest. That's definitely not a forest. What we're talking about is a transformation of the way we do normal ground level greenery, making it into a forest instead of the kind of very open savanna kind of landscape that you see now. The interesting thing is that we have been working with HDB. I don't know whether I'm supposed to say this, but never mind. We have been working with HDB to think about how we can bring back a savanna or forest-like environment to our rooftops. So instead of the kind of normal, kind of flat, boring greenery that you see on multi-story car park, what if you have like a grassland on your rooftop? Again, it's about public acceptance. All the animals that come, the bird come and shit in on your window pane, all this kind of thing. All right, but that will be similar to what we're trying to do on ground level greenery microforests. Yeah.
I see. So fundamentally, it's different, the vertical horizontal systems, but there is opportunity to turn some of these into microforests. Yeah. So I just want to develop that a little. So do you think we can do that in a roof, the rooftop gardening on the car parks? Do you think that's possible?
Right now, opposite my bedroom right now, during COVID, there was not enough workers to maintain all this, right? The place, you see banana trees growing out and all kinds of weedy trees growing out. Instead of having mini forests on top of the multi-story car park opposite. And you see people talk about that you see people post on Mothership and all that, all these articles. It's absolutely possible. Where we have colleagues from the School of Design and Environment in NUS, they purposely allow one of the rooftops on engineering to grow into like a mini forest woodland kind of environment. And they brought in people to take a look at this, and people are amazed. You can actually have a forest up there. And some of these things, you don't have to purposely plant stuff. You just wait for it to go crazy, and then the forest can come back. So it's absolutely possible. But then, scientists. But then, it will always be, it comes all the other issues that come with it that we have to resolve.
Very good. Before I ask, everyone is posting on the chat group. I know, Katie, you posted one, but I want to encourage people to dive in and ask questions. So can I have a show of hands who wants to ask questions directly to Dr. Chong? So we have, okay.
I guess there are species, you're right, that adapt to the urban environment. Roads, miners, pigeons, sparrows have no problems. They're very well adapted. Even the butterflies, I can tell you many species that you see these yellow butterflies. There's the really yellow ones and there's the pale white ones. Okay, and there's this butterfly which has a beautiful name called painted Jezebel. The caterpillars actually eat mistletoes that are actually found on our street trees, and all these are all very well adapted to our urban environment, right? Some things that you probably don't. So sometimes when you walk around your neighborhood, you will hear this tweet. That is a sunbird. Okay, there are two species of common sunbirds in the parks that very well adapted to the urban environment. These don't have problems at all. They will go to a lot of greenery in the urban environment, but they're already there, and these are actually not the species that need help. The species that need help are really those that really are restricted to forests. Okay, there are about 400 species of birds that have been recorded in Singapore, migrants and residents and all that. Okay, probably about 400 species of butterflies. I don't know how many species of dragonflies and so on. So a large proportion of them are actually forest restricted, shy away, and they stay away from roads. Okay, and they form a gradation of how well they can adapt to the urban environment. Those that are very well adapted, those that are not. So there will be many species. So I can tell you, like, boo-boos, just boo-boo. Boo-boo is a kind of bird that actually eats fruits. There is something called the straw-headed boo-boo in Singapore, right? Singapore has 1/3 of the world's straw-headed boo-boo, and this boo-boo species is poached to extinction in some parts of Indonesia because it makes a melodious call. And this boo-boo is doing very well in Singapore, but it only does well in quite forested or woodland areas. Okay, it's found in Bukit Batok Nature Park, Siao Kuan Yin area. You can go there, you can hear its sounds in the morning. But then there's also a very urban boo-boo, the yellow-banded boo-boo, that can be found in many of our parks, open parks. So many species, some will adapt to the forest environment only, some are adapted to the urban environment. So I think it's really the forest ones that really need help. Not sure if that answers the question, but yeah.
Wonderful, very good. Any more questions from anyone before I go back to the chat? Okay, Rebecca, you can ask your question.
Hi, yeah, so I was wondering if there's I have two questions. So I was wondering if there's a minimum area or space to be for an area to be considered a microforest, as compared to maybe a nature park or nature reserve or parks or gardens, because there are different nature spaces around. So that's my first question. And then my second question is, in terms of living spaces, because you mentioned that some people are further away from the nature reserves and parks, but they would still like to have access to a microforest, right? So in terms of that distance between people and that forest, is there not exactly an optimal ratio, but is there a good distance to have, so that so that it's something we can work towards to achieve, and everyone can have access to a microforest or a nature reserve of sorts, within, I don't know, 1-2 km or something like that. Yeah.
So these are two $500,000 questions. So okay, so second question I have in mind. First question, someone can remind me again. It was about
optimum size, the size.
Optimum size, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a good question. So I mean, microforest, which means that we have some expectation that it's going to be very small. Okay, so we can at least talk about what is the upper bound to this very small. We know that at least the native garden at Hort Park shows us that in a 35 by 50 meter area, it's possible to have a microforest. And with Aslam and our colleagues, we've been talking about this. It shows that at least if you can find 35 by 50 meter area in our estates, is at least possible. But I would say the smaller you go, right, it's always still possible to have a forest environment until it becomes a little bit maybe ask yourself, is this really a forest? But if you talk about the biodiversity benefits, as an ecologist, the smaller forest you go, the more restricted the kind of animals that you actually want to help with this kind of forest. Because we talk about a gradation of animals that can adapt to very urbanized environment and those that require extents of forest in order to survive. There's whole gradation. The smaller you go, the less animals can actually benefit from the kind of forest. So that's a general rule. Of course, you can go bigger and bigger, then eventually you might as well have a real forest. But at least I would take the native garden at Hort Park as an example of that kind of size. You can have a very good effect in terms of aesthetic enjoyment for us. Second question is there is optimal distance to is kind of optimal ratio of green spaces.
I think the question, Rebecca, if I'm not wrong, is distance from where you live, right? Yeah.
So common way of planning green spaces, there's two metrics, measurements that we use. One is what Aslam had talked about, the park provision ratio. What's the area of parks that you provide per 1,000 people or 10,000 people. Okay, that's one way. The other one is what Rebecca mentioned, which is what we call accessibility kind of measure. So, and that's how urban planners plan parks. And, in the UK, they would have like different tiers of parks, nature spaces, normal greenery. And in each of these tiers of parks, they will say, within, just like what we have, like 85% of households must be within 10 minutes walk to a certain kind of park. So that's the kind of measure that I guess Rebecca is talking about. Again, I don't have an answer. It depends on what is the target, or what are we trying to optimize, and what are we trying to achieve. Because when we change what we want, then this magic number changes. So if we say, we want to make sure that everybody has a certain accessibility to natural areas like a forest, there's at least of a certain size, maybe a 0.5 hectare forest. Maybe you want 90% of people to be within 10 to 15 minutes away from this kind of forest. The amount of green space that you require is different. The amount of resources you require is different. And the trade-off then comes in, like what Aslam said. Are we prepared to actually have these kind of trade-offs? To what extent are we willing to go so far into it? And therefore, it's no longer about, what's the optimum ratio? The optimum ratio is that everybody has a forest right outside their doorstep. Everybody who wants a forest has a forest. But that's going to cost too much. And therefore, together, how do we allocate this? Yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. I want to now go back to the questions we have, which is from Katie, right? Katie, you posted a question. Sorry, let me just pull up the question. So how about, the question is same point as about changing mindset. Nah? How about instead of thinking what the community wants, think of what the environment needs, bearing in mind that we are part of the environment. So I guess this is not a question, this is more a statement, right? So Katie's just wanted to raise this as a statement. I thought I'd just call it out in the group chat. Okay, any more questions from anyone? Sorry, Dr. Chong, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so what Katie has brought up here, right, is it actually fits into what we're talking about. So when we optimize a problem, now I'm starting to talk about science again. When we optimize the problem, right, the decisions that we make, the decision problem that we frame can take into account many things. It's not just that, if the value that you want to include, it's not just about what human beings want, but you also want to have safeguards for plants and animals, for the environment, the state of the environment. Then you can fit in all these safeguards and you can still make a decision, an optimal decision based on all these considerations, not just what community wants, but also what the environment needs to be sustainable. And why do the environment need to be sustainable? Okay. And once you frame out the decision problem, then we would be able to make a decision. The problem is that, like what Katie brought up, sometimes we don't consider certain things. Then we forget, actually, we didn't bring this in, then we need to bring it in. So maybe as a society, we really need to know, what do we want to protect? What do we want to safeguard? What is valuable for as many of us as possible?
Very good. Before I go into the next phase, I just wanted to check in with the audience. I know, Asmi, you have your hands raised. I'm thinking of extending the time a little by maybe about 10 minutes. Before I do that, I just want to ask Dr. Chong if you're okay, because I can feel that your topic is so intriguing and many of our grassroots actually may have questions, and we may want to do a poll. So I just want to check in with you first. Yeah. Are you okay with that? Okay. And then can I check in with the 56 people still in this call? Would you be okay if we extended the time beyond 9 o'clock? You don't need to answer. If you vehemently object, let me know. But if not, I'll take it as yes. So all good, huh? So I see some thumbs up. Okay, so Azmi, before we get to you, can I just do a short poll? We have prepared some poll. I want to do the second poll. And David, can you run the second poll? Okay, so we are running the second poll. Can I get you to just answer the poll? There are two questions. So please vote on the poll because we want to get your perspective on microforests. Sorry, there are three questions. There are three questions. Okay, we have 43 respondents. We are almost at 90% who have voted. So I'll just allow it for another 10 seconds. So if you have not voted, please vote. Okay, so can we show the results? Okay, so let's see. What's the biggest concern regarding microforests in your neighborhood? So the biggest concern is maintenance. The second one being feasibility, space. Okay, this is very interesting. This is very interesting. The second question, so maintenance, huh? Okay. The second question is, are you open to the idea of implementing a microforest in your neighborhood? Interesting. So we have Taman Jurong and Jurong Springs here. 76%, my goodness. So there's a lot of positive feel on this. Very good to know. Third question is, what is the extent of thickness of a forest, microforest, would you likely be comfortable with in your neighborhood? So thickness, right? Whether you want the full-blown hot park version, the hybrid middle ground version, or the lone tree version, right? So wow, so interesting. So many people want a thin microforest with space to walk and sit. And then there's actually quite a good group that says about a third says thick ones, and then about a quarter, but majority is what they want, a thin one. So these results tell me something. People like the idea of a microforest, they want it. People don't want it to be unruly. So the whole curated idea is still there. The perception is still there, despite the fact that we did a pre-trial A/B test just now, right? But I want to ask you this question from this poll, Dr. Chong. Do you think it's possible for us to have a microforest fused with a therapeutic garden concept? I just want to test this idea with you. What do you think? Which is very similar to, the third questions, the outcome of the third question, a thin forest where I can walk, I can sit in, I can enjoy and soak in nature. Do you think it's possible in a HDB area?
Yeah, I guess. So we're talking about maybe like side by side, right? Like a therapeutic garden, and then beside maybe have a forest kind of thing, right? So you like a buffet, like you can see what kind of greenery you want. And that's definitely possible. I mean, in Hot Park, I'm not exactly sure, but the allotment there is the native garden at Hot Park. It's actually just beside I think was it a butterfly garden, or there might be actually even like a herb garden, like what you say, like a medicinal plant garden allotment just beside it. Definitely possible. Of course, it requires area lah. So if you're microforest, you really require a certain area. A therapeutic garden in another area, then you probably need to find that kind of space. That's what I can think of. Interesting idea is can we think of native plants that originally the Malays or the orang asli or something used, or like ethnobotanical kind of native plant garden that's found in the forest. You all know Tongkat Ali and all this kind of thing lah. Okay, and these are actually forest plants. Can you have like a ethnobotany themed microforest where all the plants are, we know that you use it in some way. You can even have signs where that, oh, this is called what in Malay or what in Chinese, and people use it for this. That would be interesting way of fusing the two, I guess.
Which brings me to another question that someone WhatsApped me personally just to suggest that I ask, because it's very closely related to what you talked about, and ethnobotany, native plants that the locals actually understand, like Tongkat Ali, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, does it matter that we use local plants and trees as much as possible? So first, so that means, can we incorporate foreign species or plants? Would that cause problems? And if so, what would the problems be?
So just like, microforest, you have different extents. You can still go for your typical kind of greenery, maybe not microforest anymore, or you can grow all the works. So the question of, are you going to go for 100% native species? It depends on what we want and what are the resources you want to put in. It's going to be expensive for sure.
So non-native will be expensive. That's what you're saying.
Native would be expensive.
Native will be
Funny
expensive.
Native.
Okay.
Native species might be harder to find. Yeah. From the nurseries and all that. It's not so easy. A lot of species that you find in your that we use in our planting are from South America or Africa and all that, and because they're so common and so tried and tested everywhere, so it's very easy to grow. So it's found in high quantity, so it's actually quite cheap. It's actually the native one that is actually expensive, and so it will be a cost and trade-off. So why my old boss, my former boss, is really a proponent of native species, because we help to preserve the species in our urban environment that actually found in our forests. Okay, sometimes when you introduce a species from elsewhere, it causes problems, right? We call it invasive species. It runs amok and then runs all over the place. Is a problem, and also a lot of the wildlife, the native wildlife actually evolve together across the thousands of years together with the native plants. So to use native plants means that the chances of having interactions with native animals is actually higher. Instead of using a non-native plant, and you may bring hitchhikers or unwanted pests together with the non-natives. So these are all the reasons. But I can perfectly understand that difficult, costly, or you just want a certain kind of species, then that's also okay lah.
Okay, understand. Okay, I can see Asmi, your hands raised very long time. If this was a classroom, you'll be quite tired. So why don't we get to you, Asmi? Please unmute and ask your question.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you. Dr. Chong, I guess with me, you're preaching to the converted because I volunteer with NPark. So, but I was wondering, for the plants, they'll all be planted. So how, for the animals, how active do you have to be in reintroducing them? Do you need to take active steps, or will it have occur naturally? Because I'm thinking of things like the insects, the dragonflies, and so on. You mentioned that they are only found in certain forest streams and so on. If we do this in Taman Jurong, there does not seem to be much native forest nearby for this to come over. So would it be possible, or I mean, I know that they are quite quite easy, but for other species of animals?
Yeah, thanks for the
So
question.
Dr. Chong, Asmi is one of our enthusiasts and an avid bird watcher. So I can see where the question is coming from. But please, off to you.
So yeah, it's a good question. And I think for animals, I'm personally a plant ecologist. So the animal people here, please feel free to shoot me. But animals, we need more research before we trap and we translocate animals here and there, because more in-gym, the Chinese say more niao, more requirements and sometimes we need to understand how they interact. So not the same as plants, but what I would say is that you build and they will come. Sometimes you'll be surprised at what will come. And of course, those that come initially are those that don't need so much help. They can come on their own. I would say that don't be surprised at what can come, I guess. For one thing, the migratory birds have no problem.
Yes.
So you'll be thrilled, I'm sure, to see the migratory birds once they can come. But maybe the foreign species that are in our central catchment, I think it's harder because it's further away for them to travel. I don't think we really want to trap them and bring them out of nowhere, because actually to maintain a population, you need a certain critical mass of individuals. If you bring some individuals over, even if they can survive, maybe they'll just die out and then they won't be able to breed. So what we need is, and NParks is into this. I don't speak for them, okay? So sorry, my NParks friends, I don't speak for you, but I'm just trying to also sell their work, is that they have been looking into connectivity. How do you actually connect all these nature parks that we have through, they've been looking in nature ways. How do we connect it to the nature reserves so that these populations can naturally disperse and find new habitats within our urban matrix. And all this then becomes one connected population and a healthy, big, thriving population. So connectivity is important. So when we talk to NParks about microforests, Professor Koh Lim Tin from the Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions talking to NParks about this. And then one of the things that they say is, could microforests actually serve as stepping stones in this connectivity process between the nature reserves and our nature park? And that's a good question. So, perhaps that's what function that microforests could do. Stepping stones, they refuel, and then they move on to, and then that's how you connect our populations. And that's how we can have all these animals, support them, and at the same time also enjoy them in our neighborhood.
Very good, very good point. And it brought to memory a video, a YouTube I saw that was actually one of the directors in NParks was sharing about how he was talking about biophilia and how you see the canopy in our roads. Some of them at the top connect. When they connect, birds can actually fly from one part of the road to another, or animals can move. So that's, I guess, what you're saying, right? How you create that network. It's very interesting. Okay, we are almost hitting the 10 minutes request I made. So I seek your patience, Dr. Chong. I just want to open to the floor and maybe take 2 or 3 more questions. And this time around, we allow you to speak 2 or 3 more questions before we close off the session. So can I ask the audience who wants to ask questions? Raise your hands and I'll call you.
Aslam, good evening, and good evening, Dr. Chong. I hope I'm heard very clearly.
Very clearly, very good.
Thanks very much. Only just one question to my mind. This microforest, it helps a lot on soil transformation to boost biodiversity, and to fight climate change as well. So it's basically everything is positive, but there are a couple of challenges. For example, number one, in Singapore, like we have the space is a big topic, scarcity and all. So how do you think possible ways of tackling this. The number two is we have challenges like people's awareness, human acceptance, okay? And how do we, I mean, these are the challenges which I can see, of course. Just your perspective on what can be done better to have this, like people can be convinced to cohabitate, with such things. So over to you. That's my question, actually.
Dr. Chong, you want to respond before I go to SM?
Yeah. Fantastic question on soil and fantastic comment on soil and storing of carbon. I don't have much to add, just to say that there's a point that I didn't really talk about too much then. But it's very important to know that the soil stores a lot of carbon in the process of its transformation. So the question was...
so the question, there are two questions. Firstly, how do you tackle space?
Okay.
So the space question, and then the other one is human acceptance questions. You know, how do we encourage cohabitation?
So to be very fast, I think space, we need to be very smart in our use of space. So if we want something to have long-term benefits, for example, soil sequestration, that's going to take some time to build up. Then we need to find spaces that we know are going to be maintained like that for a long time. Because the soil will build up in the ground for a long time. If it, we change it and we go and overturn the soil, then all the carbon just gets released back to the atmosphere, then it's pointless. So we need to be smart about where we put these spaces. That's how we optimize our use of space. Second question, how do we how do we change people's mindsets and all that? And I think, so I teach in a university, and I've come to realize how powerful it is to teach people, to teach students, and then and students go out there, and then they're young and full of energy, and then they actually implement projects, go out there and talk to more people, and it's like a network effect. And I can only say that we have to speak up and discuss and talk to other people and talk to more people about what we think and what we have found out. That's one way that we can progress together as a society to change mindset. So very quickly, yeah.
Okay, you.
Thanks. So it's really a follow-up on the previous questions by Azmi, Bhaskar, and others. Assuming that the whole idea of a microforest is that you want some natural ecosystem to develop on its own, naturally, including some element of wildlife, birds especially, because people like birds. They don't like snakes very much, but they like birds. They may like the sound of insects, and there may be some other creatures that they enjoy, of course, butterflies and so on. But some element of wildlife is the whole objective. If it's just plants, then I think it doesn't quite capture the objective of a microforest. So, to my mind, from what you have said, and I suppose the survey was also aimed at this, if you have too much human people sort of traipsing through the place nonstop and sort of, if humans are passing by all the time through the microforest, I presume that it's not conducive to a wildlife ecosystem developing on its own. At the same time, if it's completely without humans being able to enjoy it, we will also be losing something. So my question is twofold. From your experience and your knowledge, is there a sort of a middle path, as it were, where you really have a forest, and it doesn't just look at like 1 or 2 or 3 trees, but it's sort of got the natural feeling of a forest with a certain amount of, it grows wild, basically. But how much human interaction can be tolerated by the forest? For instance, can you have a few seats inside where people sit down silently and just enjoy the forest in the morning or in the evening? That's one question. And a related question, which is really for all of us to think about, is that whether we can in fact do it such that if we have a large enough plot, and we actually do have a couple of reasonably good size plots, including even maybe Taman Jurong Green, a good part of it, whether in fact the microforest concept can have one segment which is a little more human cohabitation oriented, where people can walk around, kids can run around and so on. And then you have a very dense component somewhere, which is allows for the forest to have its own. So that's my questions.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good approach where you stratify. So one part, which for more quieter activities, or even just for wildlife, so that there can be a core population of certain wildlife that can breed there, and then there's maybe outside in the area where there can be more activities and all that. That's probably one approach. Actually, it brings to mind. So yesterday, Today, a reporter from Today actually wrote to me to ask about my comments about people walking into Clementi Forest and what are the possible impacts on the forest. And one of the things that I told the reporter is that I think people have to learn to respect nature even if they want to interact with nature. And I guess we need to somehow create the infrastructure where people can carry out very respectful activities when enjoying nature. Bird watching, like what SM mentioned, sitting on a bench and quietly enjoying the sounds rather than shouting or kicking stuff. So it's both the software, how people behave also, but how do we actually structure this? If you have a forest, the best way would be to keep the core of the habitat patch, less disturbed, and you could have pathways or walkways to try and direct the way people walk so that they don't just cut through the forest all over the place. Ideally, you will have a patch which is as round as possible, because round means that the edges to the area ratio is the smallest, and then people can interact outside along the edge of the patch, but then the core is where more sensitive animals can actually rest. So you can either look at the geometry, you can look at the kind of way we shape our amenities to direct human traffic and have signboards. But I guess we also really need to build a culture in our community of how do you respect this nature that we're trying so hard to bring back into our environment. Yeah.
Wonderful. So
I guess my question is, if people are concerned about too much wildlife suddenly emerging, snakes, etc., there must be some best practice of how you can keep things wild and at the same time mitigate certain species propagation. There must be some best practice. I mean, there's some art to how you develop a microforest, right? So that negative externalities or the things people are worried about are curtailed, but it still looks wild and it's still reasonably dense, not too sparse.
So that's also a good question. So from an ecological point of view, one of the general guiding principles is that nature has its own way of regulating itself. So nature seeks its own balance, and it's usually an ecosystem that is imbalanced, that usually has populations that are imbalanced, and these populations are the ones that cause problems, are the ones that are pests. When you see midges flying out of the reservoirs and getting into people's eyes, or rats proliferating and all this, these are all signs of ecosystem in imbalance, where the top-down control of these populations are not there, or the bottom-up, there's too much resources or whatever that these populations are going out of control. So that is where ecological understanding is actually quite important. We need to know how to keep our ecosystems in balance, and there's no ecosystems is a complex science, right? But there are maybe a few general principles that we try to go for. That's why we try to go for intact habitats. We try to go for complexity, try to go for diversity, because the complexity and diversity in ecosystems ensures that there are also the predators and the parasites, pathogens of all populations over there interacting. The whole ecosystem comes as a whole, right? And the full diversity, chances are that there will be populations keeping each other in check. But at the same time, you need a certain amount of space and intact and ecosystems connected for these kinds of things to flow. Right? So it's at that kind of complex level. But that brings a different problem, is that we as human beings, especially with our cultural or whatever upbringing that we have, we are programmed to, we would tend to accept certain parts of an ecosystem, but not others. Okay, even though these others might be the things that are actually keeping the balance of nature. And I think that's where we need to increase the ecological literacy of everybody to understand how ecosystems work, that they are complex network, and that we need diversity, and we need to tolerate some of the little bits of inconveniences, because this is all how the ecosystem is kept in balance. That's my short layman answer as possible in this session. Yeah.
Thanks.
So that's a very good point. So, I mean, if I could just take a few thoughts on your last few points, Dr. Chong. Awareness, right? Teaching people about the ecological balance, what it means. And this goes back to even Bhaskara's questions, right? How do you encourage interactions so that it's tolerated between nature? And clearly in this session, we learned that, or at least I personally benefit from it. I've learned that people can change their mindset if we educate them. And we are actually 25 minutes past our time. I'm surprised, and I still see 53 people here. So obviously this is a session, Dr. Chong, everyone enjoyed. I've moderated a few sessions, and I know that, if you can keep the majority of the attendees so tuned in, it means that they really liked your presentation and your sharing. So we thank you for that, Dr. Chong. And today's session is the first of a new approach that we are trying, where we take it as an education to educate our volunteers and educate our grassroots leaders. And judging from the responses, I feel many have benefited from it. There's a lot of key learnings, key takeaways, which we will be summarizing. My own personal takeaway is that microforest is a very interesting concept. It's a concept that we could consider, but there are challenges, and there are clearly issues about awareness, about ecological balance. It's about making sure we find that right optimum, and fundamentally asking ourselves, what is that? What is our objective? Those are important questions we need to look at.